effect of private equity. We'll explore the net effect of private equity involvement on the healthcare system, particularly as it relates to patient care and research. With that, let's get started with some introductions. Can I ask the panelists to give a short introduction and your experience in healthcare and PE? And Ben, you're on the far left of me, so Ben, Jack, Derek, and Barak.
Sure, happy to kick it off. So first, thank you so much for having me. This is an exciting opportunity. By way of introduction, I'm a recovering management consultant. I think I always will be. I went to McKinsey out of my MBA. Spent a lot of time in healthcare with McKinsey doing healthcare strategy for large hospitals mostly. Then in 2014, started a company in women's health technology called Pacify. And in 2019, sold that to a private equity-backed roll-up of OBGYN practices. Became their chief strategy officer for a couple of years, so worked with several private equity firms in that deal. And now, having left Advantia, the company that acquired us, I advise several private equity and venture capital firms in the healthcare space.
Right. My name is Derek Hennecke, and also very pleased to be here. Old friend, and worked many years with Shailesh, so anything he's involved with, I'm very pleased to be part of. All my life I've been in pharmaceuticals, lived and worked in the Netherlands, Germany, Italy, Mexico, Egypt, Canada, and then started a company in Tampa, Florida in 2006. I sold that in 2016, and for the last 10 years, I've probably sold or bought 10 healthcare companies and been involved in private equity processes on another 20. So there's 20 we've lost and 10 that we've won, and then countless SIMs. Currently the board member and investor in 3 private equity owned pharma companies and direct investment in another dozen other healthcare investments. The 3 active ones are a aseptic manufacturing company in Grand Rapids, Michigan, CRO biostatistics CRO company in Toronto, and then a aqueous spray drying operation in St. Louis and Indiana. That's sort of traditional revenue generating private equity companies.
And a partner in Connecticut Ventures on the VC side.
The less traditional private equity, growth-oriented venture group side, yes, and that's probably the biggest part of my active life now. I think Shailesh keeps me pretty busy.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Derek. Jack.
Yes, and again, thank you for having me. So my name is Jack Feltz. First and foremost, I'm a practicing physician for the last 35 years and in women's healthcare. And my journey and passion for value-based healthcare landed me at the Unified Women's Healthcare, or PE-backed management services organization, as the Chief Medical Executive Officer, working towards transformation of healthcare for women across the country with over 2,000 physicians in 17 states.
Thank you, Jack. And Barak.
Hi, I'm Barak Richman. Also very happy to be here and really happy also to meet my co-panelists. I'm a professor of law and professor of business administration at Duke University. Don't hold the alternative shade of blue against me, please. And I guess my approach, my exposure to private equity is more through the lens of antitrust regulation and in general competition law. Most of my research focuses on how to make healthcare markets more competitive. And private equity, I've observed, has had both positive and negative impacts on how healthcare markets are structured and how they benefit consumers and patients.
Great, thank you very much. And just for completeness, let me give my background. I'm Shailesh Menge. I'm adjunct faculty at King & Flagler's healthcare practice. I'm founding and managing partner of Connecticut Ventures, which is a venture fund focused on early stage companies. We invest in med tech, pharma, biotech services. I'm also founder and chair of a cell and gene therapy company called Inceptor Bio. So with that, why don't we go again and get started? And let's start with a pretty easy question here as a softball to get us going. Since the 1980s, finance, including PE, has grown substantially as a percentage of US GDP. So has healthcare. Is this a correlation or causation? In essence, did innovation, market need drive finance, or did adequate finance, low interest rates drive innovation and market need? So anyone want to kick that off?
I mean, you know, I'll just say that I think there's clearly a feedback loop. But I do think that one of the most distinctive parts of the American economy, and one reason why more innovations, more companies, more innovative companies are started here, really is ready access to capital. It's, I think, you know, when you see what's happening in places like Silicon Valley, it's not just a concentration of talent. It really is also the concentration of alternative mechanisms to obtain financing. And that's one reason why my understanding is why innovators from across the world go to Silicon Valley. It's not so much just to hire good talent, but really to get access to private financing.
I'll kick in. So first of all, as a clinician, it wasn't that many years ago that I thought PE stood for pulmonary embolism. And so now I realize it's private equity. So I'm a little new to this. But, you know, from my seat, you know, I see healthcare inflation as all we know as outstripping our economy. And with that and the advent of value-based transformation, I think it became an opportunity for private equity to say there is enormous opportunity. If we could bend this curve, there's enormous opportunity to increase the return on investment while we bend the curve, hopefully for the better, for patient care and for our economy in general. So I think the escalation in healthcare costs allowed opportunity with value-based healthcare alternative payment models, and private equity is looking at that as an opportunity.
Yeah, maybe to what Barak and Jack are saying, it's a little bit of both. Certainly, it allows the founders to take some chips off the table. They started something from nothing, from a zero, and built up something. Everything they have is in this one company. This allows them to take some chips off the table. But for the company and for the employees and for the stakeholders, it also gives a sort of a next level for the company. Founders are good at top line and operations, but they're not so good at the back office, the finance, the HR, the efficiencies and things which private equity can say, look, just take some time. We're going to put in different type of people in, or extra people in to support that. And that'll also help healthcare economics, I think, too, with being able to make things more efficient. Capital will go to the place that's most efficient. So if the incentives are there, they will look for the thing that is transformative and making a change. And it's certainly to what Barak is saying, it is obviously very good returns. It's very easily 4 to 15 times returns for private equity in healthcare right now. On the other side, I don't see them putting on much leverage, much debt leverage on the acquisitions. Macro size, possibly, but in the sort of 10 million EBITDA to 50 to 100 million EBITDA companies, I don't see much leverage going on in these companies that I'm involved with. So it hasn't been so much that there's adequate financing or cheap interest rates to go borrow that are available, that wasn't available to the founders. And the dividends that's better used to put back into the company, and the EBITDA that's driven by the company is used to further drive the growth. So it is complicated, but I think that in general, it has been helpful for private equity to be there as a backstop.
Can I be I'll be a little bit controversial and a little bit more specific and a little bit more pessimistic. Healthcare inflation is dramatically outstripping GDP growth in the country, right? We all agree on that. And there are probably 5 or 6 causes of it, and PE is way down the list. Number one is that the slope of the demand curve from consumers for new healthcare treatments and services is pretty much infinite. Elasticity is pretty much zero. So demand for a new life-saving cancer drug in this country is basically completely price insensitive. There is dramatic proliferation of payers in this country. So no political will for a single payer system or to kind of fix the problem of the supply of payers. And then no political will to go after some of the low-hanging fruit on things like negotiating drug prices or other things that could actually bring that price curve down. Way down the list is PE. I think the primary role that PE has played recently in the last 20 years is aggregating the supply of physician services and other services like pharma, like what Derek's doing, which has the effect of raising prices, right, as they get stronger at negotiating with payers. I've yet to find a roll-up of physician practices that was PE-backed that didn't have as the first 5 slides in its deck its ability to command higher rates. And what are higher rates other than increased prices for consumers and healthcare inflation? So if we're honest about it, it's an aggregating force on the physician side of things, and that has the effect of increasing healthcare inflation. So yes, it's down the list. It's below multiple payers. It's below complete inelastic demand for healthcare treatments and services, but it's on the list of reasons why healthcare inflation is what it is.
Can I just rebut that a little bit? So I do agree with that. My experience has been that yes, clearly the aggregation and first on the list is looking at some of your fee-for-service negotiations, which does inflate the cost of care. But with that, and I believe this to be true, I know it's true at our organization, is with that is this whole idea that while we're doing that, we can actually drive down the cost of care through creating systems within value-based programs that look at how we get rid of the waste in healthcare. So yes, we want to be paid fairly for the services we provide, but while we're doing that, we have to be stewards of how we're spending healthcare dollars. And that includes the quality of care, the experience, and the affordability. Otherwise, we have financial toxicity for our patients. So I do believe they need to balance each other out, but a large part of our initiative is to drive down the cost of care through reducing waste and improving outcomes. And that is a real important part of having the capital and the expertise and the support of PE within our organization, is to aggregate doctors to really understand value, drive down the cost of care, while yes, being paid fairly for the services we provide.
Yeah, I don't have any experience in hospitals and doctors, roll-ups and things. I leave that to Jack. But in the pharma side, I haven't seen that. If you look at the CMO, CDMO, CRO world, there is no monopolization of buying out your competitors to have that aggregation power or the monopoly power. It's just too easy for somebody to come in and undercut. Certainly price is less important than quality for pharma. So quality is up there, it's expensive stuff, regulations, whatever, all the other things that you mentioned. But as soon as somebody would try to raise price, there's entrants that are coming in to take away that potentially monopolistic purchase power. And definitely since 2004, 2005, since I've really been involved in the US healthcare, pharma, CMOs, I can't name something where a company said, we're going to buy out our competitor, so then we'll be the only one providing that service. The services are just too generic. Or too easy to replicate and somebody to come in. The adage in our industry is you can't buy all the competitors. It's too fragmented.
So I had thought the question was really about innovation and not so much about actual prices. The one thing that I think the healthcare sector is certainly not unique about, but really extraordinary, is that innovation can fall very easily into 2 extreme buckets. One is the kind of innovation that really does decrease costs and provide alternatives to our bricks and mortar, highly capitated, highly structured, very expensive delivery system. And another kind of innovation built on top of that, and maybe even exploits it a little bit more. In fact, actually, very few innovations have I seen actually are somewhere in the middle. And I do think, and one thing that I talk about with my students is that when you want to be innovative in the health sector, you really want to ask yourself, do I not want to offer an innovation that exploits a market imperfection or that helps solve one? The world of private equity that I see often converts the former innovations into the latter, which is, you might say, the worst possible thing. Now, I see a lot of PE-backed ventures that really do provide new technologies, new capabilities that are really valuable. But another way to put what Ben said into words is PE not only develops these new capabilities, but then often sells them to hospitals and large insurers that really don't know how to take advantage of them. I mean, perhaps there's a possibility that once there's a physician practice that really does have a patient base, the purchasing that physician group enhances the market power, the purchasing power, or the selling power of the hospital, or the purchasing power of the insurer. But very rarely do those acquisitions really translate into changes in the delivery of care. What I would love to see is private equity, instead of looking at an endpoint of selling the company to an established entity, to really develop that company into an alternative, to a competitor of the established entity. And that, I don't see a whole lot that happening a whole lot.
Yeah, well, Barak, we're asking for two different things. I think it's important for the audience to know that we're talking about private equity and not venture capital. So what I'm doing with Shailesh on the venture capital side is exactly what you're saying. It's only innovation. There's no revenue, only investment, only R&D. At some point, there'll be revenue, and then the next person in that value chain could be a private equity. It could be a branded pharmaceutical company, but a private equity only values things based on what is the revenue, what is the profit, and a multiple on that profit going forward, and expectations. They are doing the forecasting, and we're asking a dog to be a cat or a cat to be a dog, to ask private equity to say, this is the line of revenue and EBITDA, and it's going to continue. If I want to disrupt it and change something, why am I going to do it better than somebody that's got a different cost of capital, like in VC? The private equity is going to continue it on that path and do efficiencies on the back office and possible acquisitions and add-ons that possibly have that innovation of saying, well, this type of technology and that type of technology could be better if it was put together. But for the audience, I think it's important that either we talk about venture capital or we talk about private equity. And,
yeah, and if I can just add one thing here, it's also you have to take in consideration the LPs, right? The limited partners in VCs and in private equity. Totally different expectations. If you are a limited partner, basically the people who are giving money to VCs, your expectation is going to be 10, 15 years, right? And if you're a PE company, your expectation is in 3 to 5 years, you're going to buy and sell. That's the model, buy and sell, and you're going to have, the PEs that I've been involved with, they go in, they buy something, and they say, you know what, we're going to make this business better. And they tell the employees, we're not the permanent owner of this business, but when we own it, we're going to try to improve it, because only when things are improved and better and more efficient can they get a return on their capital. So I think that's an important distinction. We're going to spend the whole time on this one question unless I move on, which is great. Let's start with the next one, and maybe Barak, if you can lead us off on this one. What are the biggest challenges facing healthcare patient care, and how can PE help? Can you share some examples with us on patients you have served that have benefited from PE collaboration? And then how have PE firms been unhelpful in some of these cases? And then what have we learned? So how has PE helped with patient care, with healthcare, and when have they not helped? And what have we learned from that?
So I don't have the same kind of experience on the ground as my panelists, as my co-panelists do. What I see, and in that sense, I should concede that I don't really see an accurate cross section, an accurate representation of what PE is really doing in the sector. But your question begins with what are the biggest challenges of the healthcare sector and what role PE has played. The biggest challenges have already been identified. We're spending too much money on healthcare. About $1 every $6 is going to the healthcare sector, whereas the OECD average is somewhere behind, like 1 in 12, and we're not healthier. It's taking away money from retirement, from education, from other priorities. It really is it's starting to flatten out a little bit, but to some degree, just the question is how large can it really go? It really is a challenge, a problem of the first order of magnitude. And my own sense is that part of the real problem with cost inflation is that we have not transitioned to a delivery model that's more sustainable, that's more appropriate for the digital age. We still have a delivery model that's rooted in hospitals, that's rooted in highly compensated experts, where individuals go out of their home and out of their communities and get specialized care at these rarefied institutions. And in the digital age, most markets have really flipped that, whether it's retail or services. We are all about trying to get outside of expensive infrastructures and to more patient and consumer-centered delivery models. And healthcare hasn't done that. Now, a lot of that is because of the way things are regulated, and a lot of it is because the way we've just institutionalized power centers in the healthcare sector, but we really do have to transform that. I think that's the best way we can start addressing removing the cost curve. And in that sense, you know, I really do think that we have to not just identify potential innovations, but really stick with them in a way of unseating the institutional incumbents, the way we deliver care. And I think PE has done a really good job, and venture capital and other sorts of financing and other sorts of innovations have done a really good job of starting these companies, but a really bad job of making sure that the companies really challenge the way we traditionally offer care. I'll say something else also about what PE has done. PE-backed companies have been the leaders among surprise billing. They've been the leaders among air ambulances that have figured out ways to legally insulate themselves from consumer protection. PE is really good at identifying where there are high margins, not because of how markets are structured, but because of how regulations are structured. They've been very good at exploiting legal loopholes. And we've had a hard time closing those loopholes, in large part because part of the PE strategy has been to use really valuable, really expensive lawyers. I mean, basically, this is my fault, my industry's fault. And, you know, like I said, my exposure to PE is not representative. I might be identifying more problems than the good guys. But that is, I think that is the problem. And that is the role that I've seen at least some PE companies playing.
Well, no panel will be complete unless we blame lawyers for all the problems. So, I mean, I'm glad we got that out of the way. And not scientists. Scientists, of course, are at the very top. Lawyers are at the very bottom. We'll start with that. Jack, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, sure. So, again, a limited experience, a limited perspective, but one of the areas I see PE has been very helpful has been in investing in a really good team, a really good management team that has allowed us as clinicians and healthcare leaders on the clinical side to put together innovative programs to improve the quality of care, reduce the cost of care, and has brought us together, which we never would have done. Healthcare is very fragmented. Most physician groups barely can get through the day seeing patients in this complex world. And this has allowed us to put together a team and then get out to the practicing physicians and provide them with the tools and resources to give better care in an affordable way. So that's definitely been an enormous positive. The investment put together an incredible management team, both business and clinical, so that we can get out to our over 2,000 physicians across the country to help the women we serve. A little bit on the negative, I guess, would be, and I don't think anyone disagree, is that healthcare has become very transactional. And, you know, PE has certainly, it's a transactional thing. And in order for us to really get to the other side of the healthcare problem, we need to really look at it transformationally. So it's bridging the gap between a transactional kind of structure with the need for transformation to make it work. And working together, I think we can get there. But when you add too much transaction, you start to tamp down the transformation that's needed in healthcare. So that may be a negative that we have to overcome.
Yeah. Ben, Derek?
Yeah, maybe I can give a few very specific examples since I represent PE, but when I sold my company, I had a UK operation and I sold it just by luck, a few months before Brexit broke in June. And we were making material in the United States, transporting in the UK, packaging it there, and then distributing it through the Europe in clinical trials. And I know that as a founder, as an individual, I had no story to tell my customers that Brexit meant nothing or it was okay, or here's how we're going to handle it. I knew nothing more than what any other American or person in Europe was reading at the time. If a private equity group was there, they'd say, well, we've got this example, we've got this strategy, this plan, even if it was not what was going to happen, it's the credibility that reduced panic to the employees, reduced panic to the customers to allow business to continue. And as we know, in hindsight, it was like 4 or 5 years later, we're still dealing with Brexit, and it's a problem now. But that confidence, or the track record, or the history, the experience. Same thing with COVID. It's just less panic and saying, well, here's what we're doing in the other portfolio companies. Payroll's going to be covered. Don't worry. We're not going to go out of business. That's the last thing that's going to happen. They didn't buy a company to not be able to make payroll. Also a sounding board to the CEO. It's very lonely at the top, and founding companies don't have boards or people to talk to other than their spouse or a well-respected friend who might not be from the industry. Specifically during COVID, there was a thing called Payroll Protection Plan, PPP. Nobody knew what the rules were, how it was going to apply, if it was going to apply. And our private equity groups got together and we said, here's what we're doing in this group, here's what we hear, here's the advice, here's maybe as what has been mentioned on the panel is, here's the regulations. And in that case, one of our companies said, no, one of the companies wanted to apply for it. And the private equity said, no, we're not eligible for it. We wouldn't, and refused, said, look, we can't do it. And that was a really, really good decision. No specifics, but really good decision. The other two companies had heard about it, but didn't know how to do it. And we were able to come in and help them in that, and also protect and keep the staff there. So I think those are some examples of where in crises, which we've had a few over the last 10, 15 years, a more stable, extra, parachute almost, or a safety net has helped our companies.
Ben?
They've given a lot of examples. Let me just say, I'm kind of, there's no question that that it's a good news, bad news story. There's no question. We acquired physician groups that never would have been able to try to put in value-based care arrangements or to negotiate value-based care contracts without private equity influence. It's too hard when you're running your own physician practice to pick your head up and say, what would a risk-bearing contract look like with this payer? And that's unquestionably a good influence. At the same time, I was personally responsible for payer negotiations that increased our rates way beyond the healthcare inflation line. And you're talking about practices we acquired that had previously taken their 2% increase every year. So then private equity gets a hold of them, and then they negotiate for 8% increases every year. And that is what is driving healthcare premiums through the roof, and increasing the high deductible health plans, ultimately the consumer cost crisis that we're living in. And it's not just private equity, but I think it would be myopic not to highlight kind of both the good and the bad of that, and the effect it has. I'm probably a little closer to Barak on sort of where it nets out. The large private equity backed companies right now are spending a ton of time talking about the former, and a lot of time doing the latter, as it were.
Well, before we get on the next question, just one comment, and in terms of how healthcare is delivered. And I think Barak, you made the comment, or other people have made the comment in terms of how we need to move away from traditional centers of power. I'm not sure how we're going to do that. And the reason is because if you look at history, and if you look at how effective research-based university care is compared to rural care, the outcomes are just tremendously, wildly different. If you happen to live in Garner or Fuquay-Varina over here, compared to living in Chapel Hill, you're going to get different care. There's no doubt about it. You're going to get different cancer care. And this is a different model because it's a high-touch model. When somebody's sick, they don't want to go. If you're really sick, if you're a cancer patient, you don't want to go on a TV and you don't want, and these are older patients to begin with. So this is a very significant problem in terms of how we deal with, and lessons learned from, and what Jack was talking about, right? We don't need healthcare to be more transactional. We need to be more personal. We need people to know that doctors care, because that's one of that causes a lot of emotional pain. And this is from somebody speaking whose wife had cancer twice in the last 10 years, right? So she's doing great, but it's because she got great care at university with physicians who really, really care. This is a real challenge in our society. Okay, on the future of healthcare, over the course of the next 5-10 years, how will patient experience change? Is there any trends that give you pause, and what can PE do to help that? Ben, you want to lead us off, since
Sure.
I've asked other people to lead on the other ones.
Sure. So again, I'll start us out on a low note. I seem to be good at that. I think a lot of the trends are super concerning. A couple of them that I'll just point out. One, we're going to see continued bifurcation and worsening in the bifurcation of care. So MD, VIP, concierge medicine, these things are going to the moon. The haves, as it were, are going to pay more and more frequently to get the university-based, extremely high level of personalized care that you were describing. And that's going to become increasingly out of reach for the general population. And I believe that the only real solutions to that would be political. And I don't think we have the political will for them. So I see that worsening over time. I do think on a brighter note, I think technology will make some of what Barak was talking about more within reach. In one of my other hats, I look at a lot of venture and a lot of kind of earlier, smaller scale PE stuff, and kind of hybrid models that are joining telemedical approaches with brick and mortar approaches that are kind of digital first are starting to catch on. And I think that fortunately the consumer is getting more comfortable with that. And that presents an angle for stripping out some of the cost that is inevitably going to increase as, again, consumer demand is infinite for medical services, and our willingness to negotiate prices is zero. And so fortunately, technology will, I think, bend that down a little bit, but I don't see a way that we don't move towards more physician extenders, more kind of what you might call factory-like approaches to medicine for the broad majority of the US population, and more concierge, higher touch, expensive approaches for the top 1%.
Yeah, I would just add, so I agree with a lot of that, Ben, but I would add that if and maybe I wear rose-colored glasses, but I would add that I think if we truly could transform to value, and we truly could create a healthcare system where providers are paid for outcomes and patient experience and affordability versus doing more stuff, we may be able to provide affordable care for all sectors of the population. So maybe I'm just hopeful, but I see certain trends, at least where I sit, that is occurring. And as you know, CMS and the Learning Action Network, they look at value being 50 to 100% within the next 4 years of the payment model. The other thing is, I think it's really important to distinguish personalized care from evidence-based care. So one of the panelists in an earlier discussion, which I really like what they said, I'll reiterate part of it, is we should always follow the evidence, which isn't done now. Right now, personalized care means sort of every physician does it the way that they learned it in their residency, and that's the care a patient gets. So a patient walks into office A, B, or C, or hospital A, B, or C, they may get completely different care at a different price. And we know that that is not good. So I think evidence-based care has to be the top layer. And then how we personalize it by meeting the patient where they are, not the patient having to meet us where we are, is going to be the future of healthcare. Digital care, will, of course, will play a role in that. But I think we have to personalize it, but never lose sight of personalization. Doesn't mean that we just do whatever we think we should do. We have to follow the evidence, and that really is the future of value, following the evidence in a personalized, affordable way.
Maybe I see two different concerns. The one is easier to explain is the COVID has stopped the door knocking of new entrants coming in and being able to pick up new customers. It used to be possible with conventions and conferences to go and say, hey, I've got this service, I've got this offering, give me 5 minutes, let me explain it to you. And COVID has reduced that calling possibility. So what it means that there are fewer startups, possibility of greater monopolization, like a couple of panelists said. That's something that can happen in the future. If you don't have these new entrants chipping away at this monopoly power, that is a concern. It does mean that there are fewer Me Too's. So the Me Too's kind of do the same type of service, but cheaper, try to keep the whole ecosystem in balance. So there's fewer Me Too's, more innovation possibly, but that sort of checks and balances kind of disappear. What PE can do, what the MBA students here can do is provide some differentiating innovation into the PE, and private equity does want, or companies in general do want a little bit of that innovation coming in, because through differentiation and a slightly different offering, you get the attention of a client, and through white papers and published scientific papers, you can come out and say, well, we're now doing this as well, and that gets the attention, and the attention then gets the business. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's definitely different than what we've done over the last 20 years. That's the simple thing. The second concern I have is because technology is driving medical and healthcare, the technology is getting more and more complicated. Liposomal based mRNA activity is very complicated, or CAR T's complicated, CAR-Ms, CAR-NKs that we're working on, complicated, hard to explain, maybe hard to explain to doctors who've been out of the university for a few years. And the access to the internet is allowing a lot of people to go do their own research, which means Facebook. And that's driving me crazy, because it means we're having a backlash against it. It's like what Jack is saying, it's evidence-based work and not personalized. What people think of is that I can do what I want with my own body. I don't care about other people. And we see that reaction during COVID of people going against the COVID vaccine. So I think that's the start, and that's a concern for me in the future, because it is hard to explain. And the MBA students can do. My advice to the MBA students here on this conference is get better at communicating. Be able to do that the 5-minute elevator speech to explain the technology easily to investors, to stakeholders, to employees, so that the message is refined and easier, and there's less fear, because conspiracy theories have a number of causes, and one of them is uncertainty of the unknown, lack of knowledge and understanding is just some possibilities for the conspiracy. So those are two separate concerns that I have.
Yeah, Barak, I want to start off because we're really limited in time, and I want to get to two more questions. So the role of the regulators. What is a rational role for regulators in healthcare and PE? You started to allude to this in your earlier answer, and I'd like for you to weigh in on that.
Yeah, I mean, regulators can play a really valuable role. Regulators, much like innovators, can do one of two things. They can very easily reinforce current market power, or they could also facilitate more competitive markets. And if we, what I thought the highlights of the last comments from all three panelists is that we really need to figure out how to get out of these centralized delivery systems and into the communities. Part of that is using telemedicine. Part of it is making individuals feel comfortable, feel like they are engaging with individuals with whom they trust, who could communicate with them, where there is some possibility of constructive engagement with the science and with technologies, as opposed to destructive or distrustful relationships with technologies. And I think that most specifically, regulators can do a good job thinking about who it is that occupies the delivery system. We have a professional licensure regime that credentials individuals based on education and not based on, say, abilities to communicate, not based on abilities to understand social determinants of health, understanding best ways of, you could call it, reaching the last mile of healthcare delivery. And I think it'd be really constructive to rethink how we regulate healthcare personnel. Trying to figure out how nurses, community healthcare workers, doulas, these are often called physician extenders, but I think a better way to characterize them is as organic or ground up community healthcare workers rather than top down healthcare workers. And that's all law. The ability, the ability that individuals, that paraprofessionals like those have in the delivery system is to totally function of how the state empowers or disempowers those paraprofessionals. And that would be a terrific way to start thinking about how to use the law in a way that can enhance alternative delivery mechanisms.
Great. Anybody else want to comment on that? Because there's a couple of other questions that I want to get to. Thank you, Barak. One question that I have for the panelists, and as we described, that the shareholders for PE firms are endowments, right? These are big organizations like universities that have lots of money, and they are putting alternative money. They're putting their money more into alternative investments like PE that are uncorrelated, or VC that are uncorrelated with the stock market or with the bond market. Now, so universities are a perfect example. Should universities and other endowments put pressure on PEs and insist on better patient care? They can do that. They can say, I'm not going to put $100 million into your fund unless you commit to these 5 principles, whatever those 5 principles are that we could. Now, so you could, one thing to talk about, regulators putting pressure, right? That works, right? I mean, we've seen what's happened in COP26 recently and what's happening, but it's another thing for industry itself to say, you know what, we're going to put pressure on ourselves. And this is what bankers are starting to doing, and they're spending trillions of dollars with climate change. That's what they've agreed to in Glasgow in the last week or so. Could we take the same approach and say, why don't universities, these high, mighty academic institutions of higher learning, why don't we ask them to insist on whatever the key principles are, and then they should insist that on the PE firms? What do you guys think about that?
Well, I think we should, and I think we have to. Recognizing that most of my business experiences come from Shark Tank. There's a great book. It's called "Get Your Head Out of Your Bottom Line," and it shows that organizations that are mission driven actually do better economically and financially. And so I think it makes sense that they do put pressure, because ultimately I think it putting pressure to follow the mission with a good business plan will pay off economically in the end. And if we are serious about giving better health care to our population, it will also accomplish that goal. So it's a win-win. And I do think we need to put pressure on them, and they will do better ultimately because of that.
Yeah, there's certainly some examples I can point to. There's one private equity that will not do investments in animal testing, although this is pharmaceuticals, and a big part of pharmaceutical testing is animals. They refuse to go into that, and that's probably due to an LP or certainly a investment board decision. Well, the example I gave about the PPP, the company said no. Yeah, they might get away with it to get the PPP, but it's not right. It was not ethical. And the third example is there's no investment ever made without meeting the management. And if the management strikes us wrong, we just don't back them. The business could be great. It's like Warren Buffett said, I'd rather invest in, no, he said the opposite. He said he'd rather invest in a good business with bad management than a bad business with good management. But I think it's more the people that are really important in healthcare. And we've had several dinners where we did the perfunctory next day meeting, but we knew already from the dinner before that we weren't going to be doing business with these people because their business practices and ethics were just off base. And that, I think, Shailesh, what you're saying, it does start from the top, and the LPs dictate that. If they toe the line, then it's easy to manage.
If the PE cannot get funded by their LPs and with the endowments, they're going to have to change. They will have to change because they're not going to get the money, right? So it just may not be. I mean, I think regulations are, Barak, I think you're right about that. We've got to do a better job but in combination with what endowments are doing and universities are doing, that could be a powerful combination here. But whatever it is, we've got to try something different than what we've done, what we're doing right now. And I think the industry is part of the solution here. One last question here. I mean, I've got so many others when I want to talk to, but we do have an audience full of MBA students here and others, of course. So I want to ask the question of how do MBA students, and Derek, you started to talk about this, but what do PEs look for? What do healthcare folks look for in new hires and people who are just breaking into the industry? And what advice do you have for the viewers here? Ben, I saw you go off the mute, so you're going first.
I'd love to take this one because I think that we do a very bad job of communicating this. Let me start with what we're not looking for. We are not looking for knowledge of frameworks that you learned in your strategy or marketing classes. That doesn't work in consulting. It doesn't work in private equity. It doesn't work in venture capital. We're honestly looking for critical thinking skills. And that's what's in short supply. And no private equity firm that I've ever worked with or venture capital firm thinks that you're going to come out of your MBA program with all of the industry knowledge that you need or all of the deal specific knowledge of how to build the right model. They believe fundamentally that they're going to teach you how to do that if you have the raw materials to learn and pick it up quickly and think quickly on your feet. And so I think it's not to say that you can't develop those skills through cases, through frameworks, through some of the tools that business school uses. It's just a plea to not mistake those for what the firms are actually looking for.
Who wants to get the last word in, and then we're gonna end it.
I mean, I'll just say that I mean, it would be very hard to utilize the powers of private equity for good from the top down. I would like to think that another attraction would be a real passion to deliver meaningful results and to recognize not just the business challenges in front of us, but the broader social challenges in front of us. And there's nothing wrong with doing well and doing good, but I think doing good and having that embedded in what you really want to do is really indispensable.
Yeah, I'll just add 2 seconds. I've never taught MBA students, thank God, but I've taught many medical students and residents. And one of the, and I think Derek touched on it, one of the things I always say is ask yourself how you can use your skills, how you can use your education to leave what you do a little better than you found it. And with that, I think it opens up a whole world of thinking about what your mission is and how you can do well by doing good. And so medical students, residents, or MBA students, I think that applies to all of us. How can we leave it a little better than we found it and use the skills and training to get there?
Jack, that's really well said. And when I teach at UNC, one of the things I get students and I say to them, look, the people in this room, the 100 students we have in this is the best of the best in terms of what we have in business, right? You were able to get in, you're focused, you're taking time off, you're the best. Do you really want to go work for a social media company? Do you really want to do that, right? Or do you really want to put something in where you can help a patient? Because everybody's going to have healthcare problems in their lifetime. They're going to have somebody, or if you talk to individuals, everybody's affected by cancer. Do you really want to try to help people, or do you really want to go do something else? Use your talent in healthcare to improve outcomes. And with that, I want to thank the panelists, Ben, Jack, Derek, and Barak. Great discussion. Thank you for UNC, and hopefully everybody learned something. I certainly did. Thank you very much, and have a good rest of the conference.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.